Southern lingo this morning. Y'all. I'm not very good at it. I'm not good at languages, especially that which is south of the Mason-Dixon. I don't speak that very well. We are continuing on with our study. Our springboard when we first began this study last year was Galatians 4, 4, and 5. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. Now, I was looking at that particular phrase, when the fullness of time was come, studying what that meant, and we're studying that period of time between the carrying away of the children of Israel, of Judah, into the captivity of Babylon, and then the successive Gentile empires that would have control and sway over Israel. And we've seen, or we will see, we are seeing, as I'm studying, I'm seeing that nothing happened by happenstance during that period of time. The ebb and flow of the Gentiles as they fought back and forth through the land of Israel, it all had a purpose. And I believe this purpose was to prepare the world for the coming of Christ. And that even though the Lord had set Judah and Israel aside for a time, the Lord is still working His will, and He's using the affairs of men and the Gentile nations and Gentile kings as well to still accomplish His will and prepare the world for the coming of Christ. And that is where we are at. Now, how many of you like to play chess? I happen to like it. I'm not very good at it most times. I've played Robin, I think, at youth groups years ago, and I never won. But I like chess. It's a game of strategy. And early on in my career as a wrestler in high school, I used to like to play chess as a way of getting ready for a tournament on Saturdays. My routine would be we'd have a light practice at school, and then I'd go to the community center and spend some time in the gym. I'd do some swimming, stepping on the scale like every 15 minutes to make sure I was going to make weight, because sometimes it was a problem. And when everything was just set, I'd go home, and then I'd play a game of chess with my dad or my brothers, just to kind of try to sharpen my mind, because I came to see at one point that wrestling was a lot like chess. A lot of the same principles. You've got your opening game, you got your middle game, and you got your end game. And so I like to try to at least keep the mind exercised too. And this is something I've been trying to get to my sons as they're in it, trying to get them to think strategically when they're wrestling. Now, what makes a good chess player or a good wrestler is a good chess player. When I'm worrying about my next move, the good chess player, he's already got move number 35 already planned. He knows where he's going. He's way ahead of me. And so that's why I'm not very good at it, because I can't think more than maybe 3 or 4 moves ahead. I've seen, as you look at the course of history, you see this great contest and this struggle between Satan and God. And it begins really at the Garden of Eden. Satan tempts Adam and Eve. They fall into sin. I'm sure Satan thinks, I've got him, God has to destroy them. But God always outthinks him. Of course, He is God. He's going to. He does not destroy them. He promises them a Messiah. And Satan thinks, I'm going to stop Messiah from coming, so he inspires Pharaoh to try to kill all the babies in Egypt. But God uses the daughter of Pharaoh to save Moses from the river, who will then turn around and cause the downfall of the subsequent Pharaoh and allow for the exodus of Israel from captivity. And you see, as Israel is taken away into captivity, I'm sure Satan's thinking, all right, God's never going to use Israel again. He's punished them. He's never going to use them again. But in spite of that fact, you still see the Lord with His overreaching, protective, providential hand protecting His people, even though they are set aside in a period of judgment and punishment for a period of time. Haman, a satanically inspired plan again to destroy the people of Israel. I'm sure Satan's strategy is, if he can destroy Israel and destroy all of the Jews, the Messiah cannot come. But what does he do? Salvation comes from an unexpected quarter. The key verse of the book of Esther is, who knows but that thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And God uses Gentile customs to elevate Esther to second in the kingdom as the queen of Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, and results in really the salvation of the Jewish people through her influence in this Gentile kingdom. And then I'm sure Satan also thought he finally had him when Christ was put to death on the cross. But those plans were shattered when Christ arose from the tomb and is risen to heaven, is sitting now on the throne, and all that's left really is the end game. That's what we're looking for now, the end game, when Satan is destroyed and cast into hell forever, and then the kingdom of the Lord reigns forever. And this is what I see as we look at this period of time between the carrying away of Israel into captivity, the coming of Christ. We see the pieces being put in place to facilitate and make the world ready for the coming of Christ. And then with the coming of Christ comes the establishment of the church. And because the stage has been set and the way has been prepared, the church rapidly expands. It's a brand new religion, so to speak. And within 100 years, it has become an empire-wide religion within the Roman Empire. And in spite of the fact that the Roman emperors did everything they could to squash and destroy this new religion, it flourished. The more it was persecuted, the stronger the church became. So this is, again, why, to me, in this particular time period, is interesting to me, because you can see how things are working together to make the world ready for the coming of Christ, the establishment, and then the growth of his church. Let's see, where are we at today? Well, first of all, we have a clicker that's not doing its job. So let's start over. It's still not doing its job, so let's go the old-fashioned way. There we go. We were talking last week. There we go. Now it's working. I was looking at, we're at the phase right now where Babylon has fallen and has been taken over by the kingdom of Persia, primarily under the reign of Cyrus II, or Cyrus the Great. And in this transition period right now, I want to look at some of the contributions of Babylon and its control over Israel that I think helped prepare the way for Christ and the church. First, we talked about the diaspora of the Jews. When Nebuchadnezzar invaded, took Jerusalem, he carried away scores of thousands of Jews into captivity and scattered them throughout the Babylonian Empire. Many of them settling in Babylon, but others in cities all around the empire, as we'll see. Now, we know historically that Christianity spread more quickly among the diaspora Jews than it did the Jews in Jerusalem and Israel. By the time Christ comes, there are large Jewish communities scattered throughout all of the Roman Empire, and every sizable community had a synagogue. The synagogues were important. The primary requirement for a synagogue in a village was to have at least 8 men. 8 men were enough to establish a synagogue within a village or a city. So any sizable city, Hope Township would have qualified for a synagogue. The diaspora Jewish believers, they facilitated the spread of Christianity to the Gentiles because they're scattered throughout the Gentile empire. The Gentiles are in contact with the Jews in their communities. They are also exposed through the preachings of the apostles to the gospel. Now, if you look at any Bible map and you match up the cities that Paul goes to preach, almost all of them say that when Paul arrives in a city that he has not been to before, the first place he goes is to the synagogue. He goes into the synagogue to proclaim Christ as Messiah and to prepare salvation. And if you map it out, this little map, I don't know how well it shows up here, but it shows some of the cities that Paul went to, where specifically states either directly he went into the synagogue or by implication. Now, Ethiopia and Alexandria aren't mentioned directly, but we know that Alexandria had a large Jewish community, and they were the ones who were the instigators of the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, the Septuagint, which became the standard and was the Bible that Paul was preaching from when he was on his missionary journey. So Alexandria had a large Jewish community. We know by implication Ethiopia must have had a large Jewish community as well. You know the story of Philip when he meets the Ethiopian eunuch. What is the Ethiopian eunuch doing when Philip meets him? He's reading from the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Why? Why is this African from Ethiopia reading from the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Now, there is a tradition among the Jews that a large number of Jews fled to Ethiopia after the diaspora, and there's a large community of Jews there. In fact, I spent a lot of time in synagogues doing protective work for those folks, and there was a debate probably about 15 years ago about what the mainstream Jewish community's position was supposed to be towards this group of Ethiopian Jews. They weren't strictly Jews by practice, but their practices were close enough to Judaism where there had to have been a common root someplace in the past. And it was a matter of debate and discussion amongst a lot of the modern-day Jews, and I think they eventually accepted them as being part of the Jewish community. And then in Rome, so all of these cities have Jewish communities in them. At the time of Christ, when the Apostle Paul is on his journeys spreading the gospel, really through the four corners of the Roman Empire. Now, if you look at Esther 9, remember the story in Esther. Mordecai, where Haman had devised this plot for the purpose of destroying the Jewish people. And Esther and Mordecai, through their influence with King Xerxes or Ahasuerus, persuade the king to countermand Haman's orders. So a new order was given authorizing all the Jews throughout the empire to rise up and defend themselves against those who had intended harm for them based on Haman's orders. And in Esther 9:7, it lists the cities where some of these written decrees were sent. Cities where Jewish communities are, by implication, situated within the Persian Empire. All of these cities are named: Shushan, Dalphon, Poratha, Aradatha, Arsai, Vajazatha, Parshandatha, Aspatha, Adalia, Parmashta, and Ardai. So, again, we know that the Jewish people are scattered throughout the empire. As a result, Christianity, because of the diaspora and its influence with the diaspora Jews, Christianity became more and more perceived as a universal religion rather than just as a strictly Jewish sect. It would become a religion that was universally acceptable to Jews and Gentiles, and I believe the diaspora had a great role in that. We also know that the Jewish propensity for idol worship was pretty much purged out of them as a result of their being carried away into captivity. They became more purely monotheistic, one God, Jehovah God, and even though the Jews are away in captivity, the Lord still in his providential hand is watching over the Israelites, watching over the Jews in captivity by raising up influential people in the empire. And we know specifically, I'm thinking here of Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They rise to prominent, influential positions in the Babylonian Empire and then subsequently in the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, last week I mentioned, why did God put Israel where he put her? Why was that the promised land? As we look at the ancient maps, we see that the major trade routes go through Israel, from Egypt up into Assyria, up in towards Greece, up into the Silk Road that goes into India and China. The main trade routes go right through Israel, and Israel would have had complete control of that area and would have been in a position to influence the world through its testimony if it had remained true and faithful to the Lord God. And we saw the nearest it came to this was under the reign of Solomon. And we saw last week how Sheba came from a Gentile nation. She had heard of Solomon's fame and heard of the prosperity of Israel. She came to see it for herself. And I believe that's what the Lord intended for Israel to do, but Israel, through its sin and hardness of heart, failed to accomplish its mission and was taken out of the way. But the Jews still continued to have great influence. Even though they're no longer a nation per se, those in positions of influence in both the Babylonian and the Persian Empire there's a lot of Jews, and they are influencing policies and practices in these empires. We see that in Daniel 2:20, in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel 2:47 and 49. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is, that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing that thou couldst reveal this secret. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. I think it's interesting as we look in, a lot of what we're drawing from is Daniel right now. We're looking at the prophecies of Daniel as he foresees the successive coming to power of these various empires as they pass off the scene and the next one takes its place. What is interesting is you look at the king Nebuchadnezzar. Every time Nebuchadnezzar has a contact with Daniel, Daniel testifies and gives testimony of his faith in God, and Nebuchadnezzar is affected by it. Every time, Nebuchadnezzar sees the testimony of Daniel and his worship of his God. Now, I wanted to spend some time, this phrase, in the gate of the king, this was an interesting phrase, and I wanted to look into it a little bit more and try to understand what this really means. We see that this phrase occurs in other parts of the Scripture, Genesis 19:1, and there came two angels of Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, arose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Ruth 4:1, then went Boaz up to the gate, and sat him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside and sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. Esther 2:19, and when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther 2:21, in those days when Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. So, the gate, it seems to be important. It means something. It has a significance whenever it's referenced to somebody here in the Old Testament. So I wanted to look at the importance of the gate. What does the gate mean? And the fact that Daniel's sitting in the gate, that Mordecai is sitting in the gate, how important is that to the story of Israel? First of all, a gate in an ancient city is a symbol of power and dominion. All cities in those days were surrounded by a wall for protection, and they had a gate that allowed people to come in and go out. Most people in those days lived in the city, but they did their farming outside the city. When danger would approach, they would all retire to the city, close the gate, and hopefully they would be secure, but not always. Nebuchadnezzar, he erected probably one of the most famous gates called the Gate of Ishtar. There's a main road that goes right through the center of the city called the Procession Way. And he built this Gate of Ishtar as a tribute to a Babylonian goddess. And its splendor was unparalleled in the world. He made it out of baked blue glazed ceramic and then embossed with these animals that represented the god that's supposed to have represented Ishtar. Now, they have reconstructed this. I believe this is in Germany in a museum. They've reconstructed what they thought it would have looked like. And so it was a symbol of Nebuchadnezzar's power. It was his way of projecting to those coming into a city that I'm the one who built this city. I'm the one who built this gate. Worship and fall down at your face and worship me because I'm such a great guy. So the gate was also a symbol of protection. When danger arose, you fled to the city, closed the gate, and if the gate's protected enough, you would hopefully be safe. They took great care to protect the approaches to the gate and to fortify the gate itself. The gate would necessarily be the weak point in the wall, so they would build towers around it, they would build battlements around it, they would construct the gate so that it was very difficult to get to it and attack it and get in. And there were even some cities where they built sort of a minor gate. You go through the minor gate and you had to turn to the right to get to the main gate. And turning to the right, the soldiers coming in and turning to the right have their shields in their right hand, so the left is exposed to the arrows and javelins from those standing up on the wall. So they would deliberately turn to the right to make them vulnerable to attack from the defenders. In times of peace, because of the high walls that were constructed around the gate, it would become a place of resort because it would be a naturally shady spot. and trees are in short supply in the Middle East, and shade probably was in short supply. So if you had a nice shady spot where you could go and get out of the heat of the sun, it would be a place where people would naturally gather and congregate and conduct their business and all that. I think a modern day example of that is if you ever walk through downtown New York City, you only see the sun if it's straight above you. Usually you're in the shade all the time because of the tall buildings there. The gate then became a place where people would gather together. It became a place for public deliberation. I'm sure when the Athenians sat around and discussed all of their philosophy, they were probably doing it at the gate under the shade. It also became a place where justice was administered. And we see references to that in the scripture about justice being administered in the gate. It was a place of audience for kings, rulers, and ambassadors, and also a place where public markets would be set up. People would come in from the surrounding area to sell their goods and their wares, and they'd set them up in the shadows of the walls that protected the gate. So, and also, to sit in the gate may also be rendered as sitting in the king's court. So sitting in the gate means, in this context, that you have a place of prominence. You have a place of influence. You're one of the king's trusted men. Your job is to sit there and do whatever those who sit in the king's gate do. Some of those might have been, it was a place of high honor. The person sitting there would be a deputy of the king to judge lesser matters. It would be a court of lower jurisdiction. I mean, they wouldn't handle the capital cases, your murders, your treasons, and all that sort of thing. But if you're arguing because you think your neighbor took your property marker and moved it 10 feet, this is where you're going to go and have your case settled, or your neighbor's dog bit your cat. That's the kind of stuff they would be hearing and settling these kind of minor disputes. Keep them away from the king so he's free to handle the weightier matters. Person sitting in the gate, his job was also to introduce persons into the king's presence. He sort of stood there as a sentinel, really kind of a sentinel. I mean, he would be, I guess his position would be similar to our current day chief of staff of the president. You don't get to the president without going through the chief of staff first. He is the one that makes the introduction and allows you in or doesn't allow you in to see the president. He has the final say. Sitting in the gate, the person sitting in the gate may also have served as sort of a prime minister. He might have been the minister of the ministers, the chief executive minister, privy counselor. All right, and we're back to Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants and trusted him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So again, we see, even though they're in captivity, the children of Israel are still having their influence on this Gentile king. Every time this Gentile king sees the power of God, he's moved by it, and he's moved to at least respect it. He may not accept God as the only God, but he's willing to at least acknowledge that this God is a God unlike any of the other gods I'm worshiping right now. So, at least at this stage, that seems to be where he's at. Daniel 4:1-3. Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. At the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven, and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say unto him, What doest thou? Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extols and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth, and his ways are judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to obey. So we know the story. It had been foretold to him by Daniel that this was going to happen. Then he, lifting up a spirit of pride, he's cut down and driven out of the throne, insane for a period of there's speculation whether it's 7 weeks, 7 years. Nobody knows for sure exactly how long the period of time was. But for a time, he is insane, and he's not in his right mind, acting like an animal. His mind is restored to him, and he praises God, and he recognizes, really at this point, God for who he is. There are many, and I sort of agree with it, that think that this was the seminal changing event in Nebuchadnezzar's life. Some people believe that we may see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. He may have been a changed man as a result of his encounter at this point with the Lord. Historical records seem to suggest that Nebuchadnezzar's rule became much more humane after this event. Before this, he was known as being a pretty brutal guy. If you thwarted him or you resisted him in battle, if your city did not submit to him, I mean, he was pretty ruthless, and he would exact a terrible vengeance on those in the cities that stood in his way. And then Daniel's influence continues. Nebuchadnezzar's passed from the scene. We now have Belshazzar. Now the queen, by reason of the words, just to back up again here, we have here the occasion where the hand comes down, writes on the wall. Belshazzar is stricken with fear so much so that his knees quake one against the other, the Bible tells us. And now the queen reminds him. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came unto the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of thy father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So Daniel's influence as a child of the captivity is still significant within the Babylonian Empire. And then, of course, this Daniel comes in, he gives the interpretation, basically it says, tonight your kingdom is taken away from you, and historically we know that is true. That Cyrus the Great, that very night, entered Babylon, killed Belshazzar, and he took the kingdom, and it became a Persian kingdom. Right now, in Daniel 6 now, we move ahead. Daniel is still in a position of influence, and he is now operating under the king of Persia, Cyrus the Great. Actually, Darius. Cyrus, there was one other, then Darius is like third in line here. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he deliver thee. I'm sure that Darius personally knew and saw the testimony of Daniel as he served his Lord and went in and prayed 3 times daily towards Jerusalem. His influence was still significant in the kingdom. And I think, Darius loved Daniel. That's what I see in this passage. He really respected and admired him. Then King Darius wrote unto all, after Daniel has been delivered from the lion's den, the King Darius is also influenced by the great miracle he's seen. Then King Darius wrote unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So, we see that even though that the children of Israel have been taken into captivity, their influence is still significant within these Gentile empires. Now, we talked about this last year before we broke off that, and I've alluded to it again this morning. The rise of the synagogue happened during the Babylonian captivity. That is significant in that is where both Jesus himself and the apostles would go first. They'd go first to the synagogue and proclaim Messiah to the Jewish people first in the synagogues. Jesus and his apostles regularly preached in the synagogues. There was, as a result of their captivity, there was a desire for a Messiah placed in the hearts of the people. Now, they would corrupt this. They would not see what the true Messiah really was going to be. They had their own ideas of what Messiah was going to be, and it would blind them so that when Christ himself came, they would not recognize him as Messiah, because they were not looking for the suffering Messiah. They were looking for the conquering Messiah. That's what they were looking for. Still, the idea of a coming Messiah is really strengthened in the hearts of many of the people that are looking for some sort of a deliverer to come and deliver them from the yoke of the Gentile nations. In this period of time, we also see the rise of the Pharisees and other sects, which are going to be influential during the time of Christ. Christ is going to come in conflict with them head to head. The Babylonian Empire also really fostered, I think it was the first to really foster a strong international trade. They again sat astride all the major trade routes, going east and west, north and south, and the caravans going back and forth from city to city and from to the east and whatever. They're bringing their goods, and it's fostering a lot of contact. It's making it more of a cosmopolitan empire. Sort of like New York. You go into New York, and what do you see in New York? You see little communities of all kinds of people. You know, you've got your Greek communities, and you've got your Italian communities, and you've got your Albanian communities, and all of these all kind of within the cosmopolitan area of New York. This is kind of what the empire is becoming. You have little groups from all the ethnic groups kind of settling in all the cities, are kind of intermingling, becoming really into close contact with each other, exchanging cultural ideas, exchanging goods and that sort of thing, and really becoming accustomed, I guess, to seeing each other. Babylon was short in most natural resources, but they were abundant in their agricultural goods. Therefore, they were able to trade their agricultural resources for the things they needed to make their weaponry and other things. One thing they were abundant in was gold. We know that the Babylon Empire was awash with gold. They had more gold and more wealth than any other empire at the time. Like I said, trade throughout the empire was facilitated. They controlled the trade routes, and as a result, they also, in order to facilitate the economy and to facilitate trade, it was necessary for them to make the trade routes as safe as possible. So they had armies and men stationed along these trade routes in order to discourage banditry and the highway robbers and that sort of thing. So it made travel back and forth through the empire a little safer than it otherwise would have been. Let's see. And then finally, we see the establishment of a standard for a system of organized central government. All power was centralized on the king. Throughout everything went through the king in the empire. The Babylonians started it, but the Persians would perfect the idea of ruling through provincial leaders set up around the empire. And they had a system of laws that applied to all the people. All people were supposed to be equally subject to the laws. And let's see. And then if we look at the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, they're written during the Babylonian exile. And many of the messianic prophecies occur during this period of time. They're prophesying of the coming Messiah. Now, we move on next. I happened to find this little statue when I was up in Sheboygan last week. Somebody had these huge statues in his yard, and I thought this is a nice picture to represent this bear that we see in Daniel 7. Babylon falls to Cyrus II the Great, and now Persia is the empire in charge. I want to look at this a little bit. Now, as we talked about before, in the image that in Daniel 2, where we see the great Nebuchadnezzar's great image of the gold head, the silver arms, the brass belly, the iron thighs and legs, that these things represent certain characteristics of the empires that they're representing. And the same thing with these animals that we see as they represent these various empires. They represent certain characteristics of these empires. So I think it's interesting to look at what are some of the characteristics of a bear and how does it refer or how does it translate to these empires. First of all, we know that a bear is theoretically inferior to a lion. However, last time before we broke off, I told you that I went onto the internet and I wanted to see if a bear and a lion were put in a cage and had to fight it to the death. Most people gave the bear the advantage. He was likely to kill the lion because a bear is able to really kill with a single blow to the head with the power of its paws. But theoretically here, bears are inferior to lions, and in this case, the bear is inferior to the lion. A bear, when roused or surprised or protecting their young, are ferociously dangerous. We saw evidence of that here not long ago. The lady that met the bear on the rail trail, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, They suspect that this bear had a cub somewhere in the area, and the bear came out on the rail trail, raised up on his hind legs, threatening this lady. And there was a girl not very long ago who was attacked up in Cadillac and seriously wounded by a bear. They again think perhaps there was a cub or something in the area that this bear was trying to protect. Now, with regard to Persia, Persia was roused to anger and action as a result of a Greek-supported revolt in Ionia, and we'll talk about this a little bit. But this sets into motion a chain of events that is going to lead to the downfall of Persia and then the moving in of Greece as the empire. But Persia had a long memory and carried grudges. So there was this Ionian revolt. The Greeks helped, and the Persians were going to try to wipe out the Greeks for this, and this resulted in the Greco-Persian Wars from about 492 to 449 BC. And so, let's see here. Bears, in spite of their apparent bulk, are surprisingly fast. I've never had to outrun a bear. And I tell my boys that, you know, if a bear chases us, it doesn't matter who's faster than the bear. I just have to be faster than the rest of you guys. So whoever's at the tail end, they're the ones that are going to get it. But a bear can run surprisingly fast. The conquest of the Babylonian Empire was relatively quick. Cyrus the Great took Babylon in one night and stole the kingdom. Next week we'll start here. What it means. The passage in Daniel 7 tells us that this bear is raised up on one side, and I want to look at that and see how it relates to the Medo-Persian Empire, and then we'll go into a little